Before we get into it further, I would like to ask Paul to start a poll. And this is actually for you to also see what kind of people we have in the room right now, also for us. Yeah, to get a little bit of understanding of the people that we have in this conversation. Paul, if you can kickstart the poll. We have two questions. So which option describes you or your company best? And the second one is, to what extent do you intend to start a new business in the food space? All right. Answers are coming in. About half has answered. People need to think a little bit about their answers as well. While you're answering, I'll get back to the results in a little bit. A question that is quite central is the opportunities we see for a regenerative food system. So to get the chat also going, I would like to ask you all to think about the question, if you would have the money, the capital, the network to start a company and start one this quarter, what is then for you personally a gap or a problem that you see related to a regenerative food system that you would aim to solve with your venture? So if you have ideas about that, please share them in the chat already. We can come to you when we get there. I'll get back to the poll results. Paul, can you show it for everyone to see? All right. I think we're seeing a pattern, Koen. Again, the biggest group are entrepreneurs. Not enough farmers. We need to keep working on that.
I think there are more entrepreneurs than last time.
Right? Yeah, it's growing.
I think it's growing. Anyway, yeah, farmers is definitely lacking, but it's harvest season and in many places in the world, and it's 4 in the afternoon in many places as well. So that probably has to do.
Probably, yeah, I agree. All right, and a lot of people, if they're not working on a business already, are exploring the options. So that's great, I think. Welcome everyone. One step going beyond knowing each other is really a very short exercise that we do, is getting into a breakout room with one other person, sort of meeting the person that's sitting next to you normally. And I would like you to answer the question, what your personal mission is you're working on. We only have about 2 minutes, so keep it short, but then you get to know someone else in the room as well. If we're all ready to go in 2 minutes, we pull you out, but for now you'll get into a small breakout. Koen, if you can get it started. Yeah, welcome everyone. Koen, you're muted now. I do want to move to you in a little bit. I haven't introduced myself properly, so I will do that as well. I'm Bart. I'm one of the co-founders of Fresh Venture Studio, and we are on a mission to build 2 to 4 new organizations, steward-owned organizations that can help accelerate the transition and build a truly regenerative food system. We are currently actively recruiting 30 people that will work from November till April next year on kickstarting some of these new organizations. So if you know people that are very interested to get into the space in an entrepreneurial way, please do reach out. But for now, I want to hand it over to my co-host, actually, Koen, who traditionally opens with his most recent learnings, talking to, well, everyone in the regenerative food space.
I wish I was talking to everyone. No, the recent learnings, I was thinking about it today as we were prepping for this call, and I wanted to point to, and I'll put it in the chat as well, 2 reports actually I read very recently over the last days. One of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, sorry, that released their latest food. I think it's called the Big Food Redesign. And the main point there, I think what really, and we have somebody actually joining now who's very aware of that, but their main point is you cannot push regen ag if we just source better and work with farmers on one ingredient, for instance, grain or they looked at grain, potatoes, sweeteners and dairy, and they really push for, we have to redesign food products and we have to buy the full rotation, as Dan Barber likes to say, or buy the full agroforestry products. And that means we probably have to make other types of cookies, other types of breakfast cereals, etc., etc. And we cannot rely on just making the one type of grain or the corn a bit better and then make regenerative cornflakes or whatever that would mean, which is a very logical insight, but it's the first time I think a big organization who has all the large food companies being a member of them puts that on the agenda. Like, you have to change your recipes. You cannot just source a bit better. And it's a good reminder. And we need iconic products. They made a very interesting modeling exercise to see the impact of sourcing better versus sourcing regeneratively from a landscape. And the impact is, as far as their models go, a lot more interesting, a lot more, especially on biodiversity, carbon, etc. So that I really enjoyed. And I think there will be a lot of space, we talked about it last time as well, for food companies to do that, to start sourcing multiple ingredients from the same farmer or multiple ingredients from the same landscape. And we're going to hopefully see a lot there. And it's sort of connected to the second report, second paper. It was more an update on what has been happening on nutrient density. What do we already know with the connection between healthy soil, healthy produce, healthy gut systems, healthy people, and healthy ecosystems? Croton Institute, David Lesacks and Mandy, and I'm blanking on her surname, wrote a great overview paper of what we know, what we don't know, and what we definitely should research. I'll put them both in the chat. It's packed with, I think there were over 200 notes or 200 links to other reports if you really want to dive deep in this topic. But I think we're absolutely at the beginning. It's something they show as well. It's too complex probably to ever completely understand, but it's very interesting. It's too interesting to not dive deep into it, as it could be the key to food as medicine and a lot of consumer demand that's currently going for the latest superfood. And we should be pushing towards more interesting, regeneratively grown or grown with regenerative practices ingredients. So those were the two main things. And I'm very much looking forward to this combo.
Thank you, Koen. Actually, I see that Matias joined as well. And that links quite directly, I think, to what you said with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, some of the things they are working on. Matias, are you also actually available? If so, could you unmute? Just for everyone I'll intro Matias while he's unmuting. Matias is one of the founders of Jack Bean, vegan fast cuisine, and probably always, but recently more and more they're working on where their inputs are coming from. And I think there's a lot to tell there as well. But Matias, I think you're there.
Hello, I'm here.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Bit of a cold, so you might hear that from my voice, but I'm feeling fine.
All right. Yeah, Koen just elaborate a little bit about like buying a landscape or working with a farmer and not buying a single crop or produce. You have been working together closely with a farmer in the Netherlands. Can you share a little bit more about how what you are doing in this context?
Sure. So in 2018, we started a new restaurant concept called Jack Bean, where we focus on plant-based food sourced from local farmers. And my co-founder is Pepijn Smijnk. He used to work with a lot of farmers in the proximity of Rotterdam, where we are located. And one of them is Jeroen Klompen. So from day one, we've been working with him, but only until last year, I had a bit of an epiphany on regenerative farming. And of course, we've been talking about this subject with Jeroen quite often. But for some reason, with us, it never really, in Dutch we say, het kwartje was nog niet helemaal gevallen. So we didn't really fully understand what the impact of regenerative farming meant for us. We started this company not to, be the next vegan fast food chain or whatever. We really wanted to showcase that you can eat in a far more sustainable way and work on a full supply chain. So that's why we also worked with Jeroen. But I only recently understood that regenerative farming is such an inherent part of our mission that we should really put more effort into this matter. So we agreed with Jeroen together with Soil Heroes as well, that we are going to buy more ingredients from Jeroen and also support him in for him to make it possible to grow more crops in a regenerative way. So for next year, we will start with 15 acres. So these are 15 ingredients that we source from him that are all grown according to the regenerative principles. And Soil Heroes supports us in this whole process.
And maybe to extend on that, your co-founder Pepijn, he's a chef. He works on the taste and developing the products as well. But he has put a lot of work, I think, as well to change the recipe, like Koen said, right? To be able to do this.
Yeah, so a nice example is that we used to work with a local bakery for our burger buns. Very nice baker, but we were growing a bit too big for her, so we had to look for a new partner for the buns because we don't make them ourselves. And together with Jeroen and a baker that he knows very well, we developed, I believe, the first regenerative burger bun in the world. So that's pretty cool. So we use his grains, and Pepijn makes a fermentation that we add to the help me out, what's meal in English?
Flour.
Super sharp. The flour, thank you, sorry. And this was really a fantastic trajectory because the baker was also challenged a lot because he had to find a new way to make his buns in a new process. And, you know, he was happy like a little child when he came presenting his bun that was super tasty, nice structure, good quality, and made from regenerative ingredients. So we were quite proud, I think all of us, so the farmer, the baker, and us. So that's a nice example how, I think from a mission or a vision that we have, we can also stimulate our partners to develop new products that can live up to this mission.
Yeah, great. Thank you for everyone. If you have questions for Matias or you just want to join in, feel free to raise your hand or ask a question in the chat. One thing I wanted to ask you, Matias, is you have been active now in the space in developing products and developing a brand, which is, well, becoming potentially a regenerative brand coming from that side. What are maybe opportunities you see that you would like to jump on, but you actually can't now, or what are other opportunities you see in the space that might be interesting for others to move into?
Well, personally, I really believe that regenerative is the next big wave, beyond organic. So I think what we'll see in retail as well is that more and more brands will launch regenerative food in supermarkets and in other retail spaces. So I think that's a very interesting trend, also from a commercial perspective. But for me, it's mostly interesting because from an impact perspective, I think this is really something that needs to be done, and we need some bold pioneers that are going to be the first ones to launch these kind of products. And our focus is really on building the restaurant chain, but we also see a lot of opportunity. For example, our burger patties or this regenerative bun, they could also be sold in retail space. But we have a challenge where we have to focus. We cannot do everything at the same time. So parallel to building the restaurant concept, we're also looking for strategic partners to develop retail lines. Thank you. We got some people now getting triggered as well, and
Jesse had a question for Matias. How has Soil Heroes helped you, or is helping you currently, or supporting you in this mission? What's the role of Soil Heroes in this case? Well, I mean, it's a very, very early cooperation. So we just launched this before the summer. So for this year, we're focusing on 2 ingredients that we're buying. So this is the first year where we're doing the first measurements. We have a meeting
early November, where we're going to make a plan for next year. So how Jeroen is going to grow those 15 ingredients, and what needs to be done in order, from all the measurement, the measurement and the what do you call it? How he's going to shift from regular agriculture to regenerative agriculture. So I think, of course, the relationship is a bit strange because Jeroen is also the co-founder of Soil Heroes, but they're the company that supports us mostly, and Jeroen is the farm. So that's the farmer. So that's how we try to divide the roles a little bit.
And I think an amazing question from Sashi, and we'll get to the other ones as well in the chat, but how has been the response? This is too early to tell on the regenerative side, of course, but in general, how's been the response in the restaurant? Because I know you've been highlighting the farmers, highlighting the journey, highlighting your choices you've been making. What have you seen as a response from your daily customers that walk in and want to get something to eat fast and nutrient dense?
Well, if it relates to regenerative, we hardly get any response. So that's also interesting. It's also because we haven't been highlighting it so much. But when we launched this cooperation with Soil Heroes and Jeroen, there was a lot of positive response, but mostly from people within this bubble, all of us here, everybody who knows what regenerative agriculture is or slightly knows what it is, they really support us, if they know us, in the fact that we try to take this next step. But for the regular customer, they don't know.
You see a role there?
Maybe they don't care either. So I think that's also a big task for us that we inform them, but this is quite difficult. So we haven't put a lot of effort in that yet. That's mostly for next year. But I think that's going to be quite a challenge to communicate how important this is to the regular customer that walks into a restaurant. I mean, for people that don't know us, we are right in front of Rotterdam Central Station. So we don't only serve for vegans, we basically get anybody that just walks in. But for the regular Rotterdammer, if you talking about plant-based food is already a lot. Regenerative is the next phase. So that's a big challenge.
So if anybody has good examples, put them in the chat.
We just have to make sure that it's super, super, super tasty. And if we make sure that it's super tasty, and hopefully we can also start proving that it's more nutritious in the long run. I think those are the two first important elements. So taste and health or nutrition. And then, all of us together, we have to find a way how we can communicate about this topic, because regenerative, the term itself is difficult. It's, I think, a big challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Matias. I wanted to see if Daniel Berchi, if I say it correctly, he said he was they're starting a Regen Egg brand in Switzerland as well. I just wanted to check in with you, Daniel, what kind of brand you are starting, and also what your experiences are with the Cool Farm tool.
Yeah, thank you, Bart. Yeah, it's great to be here and great to see old colleagues. And well, we decided we want to start a brand, and it's based on outcome monitoring. And we decided to take the Cool Farm tool, which is a widely used carbon footprint calculator on farm level, just to be able to monitor progress at farm level. We also introduced, for example, animal welfare index, and what we decided, we don't have a specific standard where farmers have to comply with to start, but they have to define some kind of guiding principles and a long-term goal for the farm. And based on that, they can apply for the brand, and they can use the brand. They can use the brand for direct marketing, direct sales. And we found that the term regenerative works quite well in Switzerland because it's quite well understood what it means. As soon as it's linked to food, people understand, well, it has to do, it will improve something. And the reaction was really positive. We have done a survey with an institute, about 2,000 consumers, and more than 65% of consumers, they really appreciated that term and that message behind, which is focusing on climate, soil, and biodiversity. It's a focus on climate, of course, but we always make sure it's combined with the other messages. And I think it's an opportunity because, of course, the organic movement is quite strong now, but it started small. And if we have let's say a brand that is more open access and allows more people to join, having a positive impact on the ecosystem at the end, that will be more, let's say, mainstream. There is more mainstream potential, I guess. So we start with 100 farmers. We start small, but we think it's interest from the industry. We heard from Nestle, we heard from others that want to source, let's say, regenerative agriculture based products, but they don't really know what it is. So our goal is to be first to define it before we have the big brands that will define it and tell farmers what they have to do. So thank you for your effort, and thank you for Fresh Ventures, what you're doing. It's great.
Thank you, Daniel. You wanted to respond to that, Koen, or because I have a question, but
go ahead.
So it's more like a almost, well, certification or a label that you're developing than that you're developing specific brands, right? It's a label that other brands can work with.
Our goal is to be seen as brands at the end. At the beginning, it's really for direct marketing, so the farmer can put it on its product, on the farm shop, or for delivery or what else. But we think about cooperation with, for example, muesli producers in Switzerland, that then we'll work with that brand, and not as a label, but as a promise for, let's say, for a better nature, better ecosystem. And it's more, let's say, it's the ambition behind. So for example, to reduce carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. And that will basically, the brand will support that message. And what we don't want to do, we don't want to have retailers joining. So it's purely, let's say, focusing on alternative marketing streams where we have more opportunities to communicate directly to consumers, or to communicate not only at the shelf, but with social media, for example. So I think the retailers, they need standards, and we see that farmers, they don't like standards because every farm is different. So we need to find ways how every farmer can have access to this movement and be able to have a premium price at the end without having to comply with standards that, let's be honest, that don't make sense in every circumstance.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I actually wanted to invite a colleague of mine, Murray, if you're still here, Murray, to maybe tease out more responses and also share a little bit of our thinking currently. Maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and share a little bit about, well, more holistically, what we have been seeing and the questions we are playing with in this area.
Yeah, sure. So I think, Bart's given, I think, a good introduction to what we're doing at Fresh. And really, we have been looking at the agri-food system for some time collectively, and we've really put together, I think, and I'd say it's a non-exhaustive list for sure, I'll say that in advance, but probably 10 sort of key opportunity areas or missions that we're quite interested to dig into, and there's a lot of depth on each one. So maybe I'll share these, and without overloading people, I'll share the 10, and I think I have particular areas I'm quite interested to dig into. But I think the first one is really how we think about how do we really rethink and scale up the inputs we need for regenerative farming, whether it's really having this diverse and abundant access for seeds for people. How do we rethink the feed that's required? How do we think about nutrient cycling effectively in a regenerative system? So that's sort of part one. Number two is it's really fundamental to think about how we can actually regenerate sort of at a landscape level as well, and how we really enable different actors to do that, and where are the models in doing that are sort of scalable. Third is really key to getting people to, how do we transition farmers to regenerative practices? There's a huge knowledge component to this, and it's very context specific. What are the barriers that are actually preventing us from disseminating this knowledge when it's so context specific? And there's digitalization problems and all these kind of things, big challenge. Sort of fourth, I think there's quite a big push, of course, for thinking about smart and precision farming within the conventional space, but how do we apply that stuff in the regenerative context? And what does that look like? What are the different sort of keys, terms, technologies that we need that really sort of, enables transitions to happen more quickly, more efficiently, more economically viably for farmers, but also reduce the inputs required? Koen touched on the fifth one, which is really thinking about nutrient-dense food. And I really love that Croatan report. Thanks for sharing it. It was really, really good. Another big one is really enabling ecosystem services, and how we enable farmers to undertake those things, whether it's through sort of market-based solutions or otherwise. I think we talked about this earlier in the discussions. So our seventh one is how do we really, once things leave the farm gate, how do we then reach consumers and maybe think about some more disintermediated value chains, or how do we think about building regenerative brands that consumers understand? How do we think about maybe farm to fork product chains, for example? One which is sort of, I guess, an indirect enabler of agriculture is really actually thinking about how we have non-food uses for biomass. So how do we take some of the how do we replace sort of polluting inputs and fossil fuel-based inputs using biomass, but also not overloading sort of arable lands with that too, which is a big challenge, but also building new business models around that for farmers. Thinking about what the new sort of localized systems look like, whether that's using vertical farms, recirculating aquaculture systems. How do we help sort of smallholder farmers have thriving livelihoods? So really thinking about this sort of local, rural, coastal communities and how we make them resilient. And finally, is this big one around really enabling transition finance to flow, and what that looks like in the future, not only in terms of what we're investing in, but how we're doing it too, and what the big blockers are that are preventing more capital from flowing in a sort of mission-aligned way as opposed to an extractive way. So those are like the big 10 sort of missions that we're looking at. Probably a lot to take in. I think we can post them on the chat too. And I think within those areas, there are tons of different questions around these missions of which we can really get into the depths of. And I definitely have some things for the group around particular areas. And I think, Bart, you've got a couple too. But we see really fundamentally interesting opportunities for ventures, right? But also probably lots of unanswered questions at the same time. So I think it'd be interesting to dig into some of these areas, some of these questions, and see what discussions come out of that, and also if anyone has any interesting ventures they're already aware of that they think are really making an impact too. So that was a very brief ride through.
Very brief, but also very much touching a lot of things, I think. But that's great. Which one do you think, Murray, now? Because one of the things I would like to sort of exclude is the ecosystem services. I think we've talked about that quite a lot in the conversations. Very interesting, though. I personally am especially also interested on the input side. I think I find it hard to get specific there, but I wonder what are the where do you want to have emphasis on right now, or what do you find maybe difficult also to find answers in?
Yeah, okay. I think it's nice. Maybe we start with the inputs one. I think I'm quite curious. I know you had some thoughts around sort of manure management. I'm also interested around this sort of idea of really opening up a higher diversity of seeds, make them more accessible. Like, what does that look like in a regenerative system in the future? Like, what are the levers we need to pull around that, as well as, how that nutrient cycling component that you were talking about, manure. Maybe that's a good starting point. I've got a couple of other areas I think there's tons of juice in too. So maybe we'll start there.
Great. Maybe Koen, you can. We already briefly discussed it, but I also wonder what is happening in the input space and how to do that more regeneratively. Can you elaborate a little bit, and then for everyone else to jump in, please do.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, as I'm definitely not an input expert, and I think I've shared it before at other convos. We get a lot of requests for being on the podcast for a novel input company or somebody that makes an ingredient that's the holy grail that makes your soil amazing wherever you are with any soil, etc. So there seems to be a lot of noise in the space. There's definitely a lot of interesting companies being built. It's very difficult, at least for us, to distinguish the interesting things between from the noise. What I see though is a lot of push for more localized and more specific, context specific. A lot of farmers are doing that are more advanced in the journey are doing a lot of things themselves, which obviously doesn't scale in many cases. So it's that constant tension, like what do you buy in and where do you get it from? And simple in terms of manure, what quality is it and how has it been treated and how many medicines are you going to find in it? And that's the same with all other inputs. So it's a very interesting tension between input companies that are promising a lot of things, and farmers that want to control the full value chain, just as stuff that comes off the farm, like that start to do things in-house. But of course, if you make your own biofertilizer and you have a large farm, you end up basically building a brewery, which is not the core business of many farmers. So I think it's an interesting transition piece. It's always like, how long do you need this specific input? Where is your fertilization coming from? What kind of insect pressure, etc., you're going to get, or pest pressure, and how are you going to tackle that? And the best produce, what we see is it's very, very expensive. Like, it's a very interesting business, because the stuff that works, the companies can charge almost whatever they want. Pushing farmers again further into whatever you can make yourself, which is maybe not that controlled, not that tested, etc. So also the results vary a lot. So I find it a very, very difficult one. It's, if you can lower the input costs of any farmer, obviously the profitability of the farm goes up very quickly, because it's one of the main costs next to seeds and other things, depending on which sector you're in. So it's super interesting. I find it extremely difficult to pinpoint to a few great examples of input companies that really perform amazingly or are super reliable in that sense, because there's just so much out there and so much being promised to farmers, and very difficult to verify, as there's not too much research into how they mix together, how they work together, which context, which climates, etc. they work from, or they work in.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Koen. Murray, you wanted to respond?
Well, I was curious, when you talk about inputs in that sense, are you talking about sort of seeds too, or are you are you referring to, just
not necessarily, but it is an input. It is an input at the end, I think, or it comes into the farm. I think if we make it as broad as possible, it has input as well. It also has genetics of animals if you have a livestock operation, and we probably, any farmer would like to control it as much as possible, what comes in. And the truth is now that most of it you just don't know, or there's only so far you can search there, or you can trust, and that's very difficult or very risky, I think, as a food system, as well as we're seeing now, in terms of genetics. So I seeds, definitely yes. Seeds is a whole different. We can spend a whole other hour, and we probably need some seed experts on that. Hugely risky as well, to buy seeds from 3-4 huge companies that tomorrow can change their direction and you're out of broccoli seeds, is very risky. And I think also there we need a lot of innovation, and hopefully a lot of diversity, literally, in seeds and in companies, simply to supply us with supply farmers with the choices they need.
And maybe it's, an element of opening up IP, like not having monopolies in there, also trying to look at greater diversity. I actually found quite a good one from Dan Barber, which I'm sure you're aware of, I think it's Dan Barber, the Row 7 Seeds, which I've shared the link.
Fascinating things. Yeah, thank you for sharing it in the chat.
There's probably way more we could share too, but I think, there's just lots of different angles.
We need 20 or 200 of them, because they all get bought up by large seed companies at some point, which is very unfortunate. It's a great exit for the companies, but it's just
maybe. Sorry, maybe we can get beat Caldaway Samaras. I think one of the people that voted being a farmer actually involved as well, together with Jesse Davidson, because they both connected to this as well, and talked about the integrated livestock management. So Jesse introduced it, and Beat, if I pronounce your name right, shared a little bit about how you practice it, but also the challenges that you're facing. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on what you're doing already, and what are the challenges for you?
Yeah, so but I'm new to the industry, to say that. I'm coming from the financial industry, moved into regenerative agriculture really just because we wanted to follow our passion, and are now producing regenerative olive oil in northern Greece. And so what we see around us, we're the only ones incorporating livestock to begin with. It really brings up a whole new set of challenges, despite the manure, and mainly from a regulatory standpoint, because suddenly the paperwork that you have to fill out, the classifications that you have to follow, the land space being tested for, 10,000 kind of things, plus having to feed the animals antibiotics or stuff that we don't really want to feed them because we want to turn their manure into something regenerative for our growth. That's a whole different level. So we do it, but really more just to be stubborn. I'm from a German background and like stubbornness, and I want to fix this. That's what's driving me, and to really to showcase it. But I wouldn't recommend it to any other farmer, like someone who really has to depend on it to only have the farming business. We are lucky enough to do freelancing on the side. I wouldn't recommend it because it's really financially draining, energy draining. So the majority of our own manure is completely going under the radar. That is from our donkeys. And we do have a lab by now. So I did the studies with Dr. Elaine Ingham to really analyze it under the microscope. But it has to be completely under the radar, because if not, like following regulations, it's just something we wouldn't be capable of. So that's a challenge, definitely. The other challenge is, I think a lot of that comes from thinking of farms the way they are structured more in the US, in parts of Europe as well, where you have all of your fields around the farm. But for example, in Greece, that's not the case. All of us are living together in a small village, and then all of the fields, all of the groves, they are completely separate up to 20 kilometers away in what they call campo. So there you can't just leave your animals overnight. Even electric fencing gets stolen. It comes with a whole set of challenges. So it's not that easy. I wouldn't recommend it despite loving it, but from a business economic perspective, nope, rather buy the compost.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you very much. It's that's a great perspective as well. Actually, we have been involved, and this triggered the question for me as well. Coming from a bit of the other side, actually, in the Netherlands, we have a lot of animals, pigs and cows, and there's a big thing going on reducing those actually, and we have been involved in a project where this question is very much on the table as well. But they also use the manure and also want to be, well, not be dependent on manure coming from elsewhere, because then the quality is so hard to assess. And also, even if you take it from a landscape perspective or a broader context than just the farm, you work with the neighbors. I feel there's, well, I wouldn't say distrust, but it feels like a big risk to work with the neighbors to get the manure. So actually,
plus it's not regenerative. It just doesn't make sense from a regenerative standpoint to have the animals in one side having a farmer dealing with some issues, then transporting and actually causing emissions to transport the manure, get it worked somewhere to transport it again to another farm, and not to have all of the other benefits, neither for the animal, neither for the groves or other fields, whether them chewing or something else. So
exactly. So it's then it's externalized, and so that was very much a problem. Like, if we stop with the cows, then we need to get the manure somewhere else for the scale of the farm that they have. So accelerating, and also because there's so much pressure now on the decision making with decreasing the amount of cows, for example, or investing in the infrastructure that you have, that, well, in some way accelerating the ways to replace manure, or in other ways than is currently being done, I think can really accelerate those decisions in doing it more regeneratively, without, as you say, just buying it somewhere else where they have horrible practices, or at least not regenerative practices. So thank you very much, and welcome also to probably your daughter for joining in. I think we also had some questions coming in, Koen, in the chat. You're always keeping an eye out.
Yeah, I'm trying to answer some. Richard had one on scalability, and which is an enormously complex question. But I think that the potential for regeneration, we would all agree, is enormous. If you look at the landscapes we're used to and how degraded they are, that doesn't mean that we should just scale any farm to infinity. And so there's definitely a tension there, and it really depends on the context, the landscapes, what size of farm makes sense, and even if farms in the current form we know them, in many cases single family farms, etc., make sense at all, and if there shouldn't be multiple enterprises on top of the same land, which might be holding a trust, and that opens a whole other land ownership discussion. But I think we're going to see a lot of new models, but what we've seen definitely is the profitability can be there. Definitely nodding to the pioneers, like we just heard, that are trying to find these recipes, are battling every day with the authorities and the bureaucracy that has not been set up for this. They've been set up for a 50,000 or a million chicken indoor factory farm, and would never imagine that these chickens might be integrated in some kind of livestock operation, let alone under olive trees with donkeys, which of course gets us in a hole. So we have to owe it to them to fight these rules and start to also make sense of what kind of regulations and policies we need, which need a massive overhaul almost everywhere. But the scale could be there, just maybe not from a single entity, but from many different ones, depending on the landscape. I see some discussions on integrated livestock. Daniela raised a very good point. It really depends. In many cases, it doesn't make sense. In many cases, it does. As always, it's context specific. And watch out for, this is the recipe for everywhere. And usually that doesn't work. And usually people, let's say, take a few steps too fast. Like, what makes sense in that landscape to regenerate? What makes sense economically, and what makes sense policy-wise? Because in many places you cannot do certain things. And thus you either have to change the policy or ignore it or don't do it. But you have to be aware of that. I see Daniel also asked a question on the commodity pricing. Yeah, as long as you don't get the premiums. I mean, if your costs are very low and you can sell in the commodity market and turn a profit, great for you. If you can't, you need to find some kind of premium somewhere from someone that wants to pay more for nutrient density or specific quality levels you might be able to reach in the beginning or not, or for some kind of story and some kind of journey and transition you are on. But if you're planning to play in the commodity markets, you might have some really good years and might have some really, really bad ones. And that's, I think, from a risk perspective, very, very risky, because it's not up to you what the coffee market will do. It's not up to you what the grain market will do. You're way too small to play in that. So I agree, the big commodity players have their major statements of what they're going to do in regen ag and their sourcing, et cetera, et cetera. If they keep paying exactly the same prices as they've always done, nothing changes. I think Nestle made some commitments now, or at least some announcements, that are going to pay premiums. I think we need to follow up on that if they actually do, and then push the others, if they do, push the others to do the same, because you cannot source the same thing, ask all kinds of other things, conditions from farmers, and then expect crazy outcomes and just have the same bill at the end. So I think I got a few of the questions. I will go through them and see if there are some others. But
I think Daniela also responded to the livestock integration, which Jesse responded to. But I think that part of the discussion is also in the chat, and I think super relevant. I'm not sure if Jessie also wants to elaborate a little bit on the livestock integration personally. She has been involved in that conversation.
I'd be happy to just kind of put my 2 cents in. So just as a bit of a background, I'm a master's student studying global food security and nutrition. So most of my knowledge is very, I guess I'll say, hypothetical. I don't have a whole lot of practical experience in farm management. I thought that Danielle brought up a very good point about how livestock integration is becoming like kind of a mantra when it comes to regenerative agriculture, and it's not necessarily a universal fit, as has been mentioned before. I think when I'm considering livestock management, more what I'm saying is just that no farming operation that's like completely devoid of any type of animal or insect life is one that can last long term. In nature, you don't find an area where there's just plants and no animals, or the other way around. You have to have both in order to have a resilient system. And so any type of operation where there's no pests because of all the pesticides, or there's no like livestock integrated anywhere, is just something that can't really survive. So I think it is really interesting to bring up the fact that it shouldn't be a universal solution, but it's definitely one that could work in a lot of areas. And in those areas, it's not something that's being considered on a large scale right now. And one of the things that I said earlier was just that I think a big barrier to that is that livestock farming and like produce and vegetable farming are seen as 2 different industries and are operated as such. And I think that systemically that needs to change in areas where it can, in order to kind of allow farmers to more easily integrate livestock where it is a possible solution.
All right, thank you. Murray?
I'd love actually to dig into the technology topic briefly, and maybe we've only got 9 minutes, so I don't know if it's too big, but I'm curious whether this idea of sort of, how we use precision farming, smart farming, whether that's fundamentally at odds with the sort of the principles of regenerative agriculture. I think we're seeing the use of robotics for seed drilling, and robotics actually across farms. Is this fundamentally something that is actually really going to enable regenerative agriculture to proliferate? Or is it actually sort of this tech utopia idea? And I think there's a range of other things that I've found recently that are pretty interesting in terms of, I think I read the other day that farm data is now this increasingly large market, and a lot of bigger companies are looking to actually get into farm data and owning the data. And I'm curious, it's a discussion whether we really see this as a fundamentally important area to be investing in, with really this tech directed at sort of the regen angle, or whether there are actually these risks related to it. And if we think it's interesting, what are the areas we really think are really interesting? Is it the robotics? Is it, sort of sensing to help ecosystem services, the farm data angle? Very curious.
All of the above.
Sorry?
All of the above.
All of the above. But I mean, you think usually you're not doesn't got a place within the regen transition, right? It's it's going to help accelerate it. You think? Does it make it more viable?
I think it's any tool like livestock, like finance, like fire, in some cases, like water. It can be extremely destructive and can be extremely regenerative, really depending on the intention. I think we're gonna see a lot more technology, and I think any technology that can help farmers regenerate faster or understand the landscape better, measure better, but gives them action and real insights of doing things is great. Anything that takes that away, being the data going to a large company, being a technology that they cannot open or fix, change, etc., is probably not empowering. So, but I see a lot for robotics, and I see a lot of potential for a lot of things that now simply cannot get done because there are not enough hands on the farm that might be able to get done with other types of hands. But again, if it helps the farmer empowers the farmer to regenerate more, why not? If it doesn't, I think that's the risk for me at least. But the same with finance, can be an enormous tool and can be an enormous destructive force as well, as we've seen.
I think I would like to bring in Hannes as well. He said, and also have a different question, Hannes and Willemijn, both of you actually, to round it off. But thank you, Murray. I think we should and will be going deeper into this subject. But Hannes from the Eekhout, you said it depends on the ownership. Willemijn completely agrees, and I think there's another subject I wanted to briefly introduce. But Hannes, maybe you can join us. And Willemijn as well, if you are there. Hello, Hannes. No audio for Hannes, I think. Willemijn, are you available?
Yeah, I was just hiding behind my camera. Because we're seeing that, after a few years, you have a larger network of farmers that you're cooperating with, supporting, and there's more and more sort of data being gathered as you restore the soil, as you apply more practices. So we're working on developing, basically information systems together with farming networks to understand how this data evolves over time and how that can be used as a proof for payments. So we consciously stayed away from sort of large tech giants to build these systems. But how do you, it's just we haven't found, we don't feel like we're knowledgeable enough to understand which decisions we're making and what the effects are in the long run for farmers, for land users. Of course, we can follow the GDPR guidelines, but this is bigger, I feel. Like this is land data and land use data, and how do you secure that in a way where farmers can always withdraw whenever they want to, and that it's not misused? Or I just wonder if there are good resources or organizations thinking about this. Because I feel like the data is like a new form of commons, and it needs to be protected, or organized well, basically.
Yeah. Thank you, Willemijn. Hannes is also asking a question in the chat. He probably can join us, but the thing I wanted to extend upon, maybe as a final remark a little bit, it's something you reached out or you shared after the last conversation of Convo, a subject that you would like to introduce as well, that would just give some space for it to introduce maybe. And I know Hannes is familiar with both areas. It's about agroecology. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I realized that regenerative agriculture was sort of not back. So there's not enough peer-reviewed science backing regenerative agriculture. So it is increasing, but it's still not competing with the research backing conventional agriculture, right? So both in terms of resources going towards it and the research resulting out of it. So I was thinking, so if agroecology is more established and has more scientific research backing it up, could that then be a better opening in terms of transitioning the food system because it's more established? But then I also understand, diving a little bit into the agroecology movement, it's really beautiful, and it also very much connected to social justice, and it's originated largely from Latin America, but it's also a bit more activist. So collaborating with large corporates is almost not done in that kind of movement. So I was just an open question, like, how can regenerative agriculture and agroecology, how do they relate to each other? How can they reinforce each other? Connecting movements, basically. Sometimes it's the same people doing, just calling it differently depending on where they are.
Yeah, exactly. And even the wording can attract a specific group, while maybe different groups are actually working on the same thing, which I think is hard. Yeah. For example, I think regenerative agriculture, the term is especially popular in Northern America, probably Australia, even less so in Europe, probably.
Good thing to add is that we did a bit of a scanning of policy documents, especially European and United Nations level documents, to see which agricultural term is popular. Regen ag was almost never mentioned, but agroecology was, or sustainable agriculture. So that was a good eye-opener for us to see, okay, so regen ag is not, this, that term doesn't ring bells in the policy environment, especially in Europe. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think Hannes isn't able to do so, but maybe for a later moment, or even you can connect directly. He's been involved quite actively in the agroecology movement, and now in regen ag more and more. So he is sort of emerged in both worlds and seen the cultural differences as well, and maybe sees a potential. Maybe I can make the connection. But for now, we're also reaching the end, I think, Koen, if I agree. So it might be time for maybe some last thoughts you had on this session, and then we need to wrap it up, I think.
Not too much. I think, as always, we only scratch the surface, so pun definitely intended. There's so much to explore here, from the naming, the language, to the technology side of things and the finance side of things. So on to the next one. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. We'll probably do another one next month as well. We still need to pick the date with Koen, but we'll probably do that. As said, we are actively looking for participants in our program, so people that want to make a jump in building an organization in the regenerative space. So very open to do so. If you have subjects that you want to make more prominent in the next conversation, or you want to get involved on a subject in any other way, please do reach out, and we'll try to create the stage for that conversation. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.